This is iPardalis. So today, I actually had a customer stop by my facility, and they came looking for a yellow chameleon. And the clutch that they had reserved didn't prove out. They were mostly orange, some that looked almost like they would go full red body. There was only one yellow, and I was going to keep them. And so when they came to talk to me about this, I did my best to try to explain how it could happen. I think I failed. I think I failed to communicate exactly why, because it's often, in a situation with a customer, especially at the point of sale, there's a lot of things going through your head. Like, are you going to lose this sale? Like, if you tell them exactly that the clutch didn't prove out, but they're still nice. And I think mostly it's true. But the problem is, I've always come at breeding with a goal. And so often people will come to me with a goal. And if I don't achieve it, then I could lose that customer. And I think that what is kind of therapeutic about this podcast series is it's a long form answer for me, for you, and hopefully it helps open up this conversation so that people can make more accurate estimates, but then also understand that it's an estimate, that we're just guessing. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the iPardalis podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hill, and I'm here to introduce a new mini-series on the Chameleon Academy network. It's a collection of podcasts that are going to be published through the Chameleon Academy and Bill Strand, produced by community members. So people like myself who have been listening to Bill since 2015. We now have an opportunity to host a couple episodes and see how it goes. I know for me, this is a really big step. I don't know if I'm like a radio guy. I do enjoy podcasts, but I know that I don't enjoy a lot of the social media outreach that is developing, like TikTok and I don't know, like Twitter, a lot of the short form video and things like that. I find myself completely out of place in those media. So when Bill mentioned this opportunity to me, I got pretty excited. I was like, wow, great. Some way to talk to people about chameleons that is not mindless and with like hip hop beats or something. That does not it's not something that keeps my attention for very long. So I was incredibly honored when he mentioned the opportunity. I'm also really excited to see some of the other series and what other people come up with, because one of the cool things about the Chameleon Academy is Bill has built this network of experts, of people who have gained all sorts of experience that I really enjoy learning from them. I really enjoy those conversations, and I see this as an opportunity to just selfishly engage in that for however long as it takes, however long as it goes on. But I I'm hoping that the way that this miniseries is structured is we start with some of the basics, genetics and phenotypes and locales, and kind of come at it from a little bit of an academic perspective before we get into some conversations with breeders of differing levels of experience. We have breeders with 1 year of experience, 2 years of experience, in that range. It's a first clutch type situation. Conversation with a few breeders that I've worked closely with over almost the entire duration of my experience, and then a few conversations with breeders that are kind of the original breeders of the species. I'm sure there's plenty more, and if you're out there thinking, no, I'm the original, please contact me. I'd love to talk to you. But as far as the people that I know personally who have been breeding panthers for a really long time, I reached out to all of them to see if they were interested, because from my perspective, there's something to gain from all of those people. The people who are just getting started right now, the people who have been doing it for a little while, kind of your new breeders but established, and then the people who were doing it before the internet, who really had to figure things out for themselves and get creative to have any sort of success, and that have continued until today. I think that those perspectives are incredibly valuable. And I also want to say that breeders often get into silly conversations or silly competitive type statements like, oh, this person is the best of this or that and the other thing. And I honestly think that those are, I don't know, it's pretty stupid. But the people who were here, who had to figure it out, kind of be like the first to successfully breed a given locale, the first to get an animal to live past 5 years. We're talking about pioneers, and there's no way that anything that people who came after that can ever achieve the same thing, because they can never be the first. The first is already over, and you're sitting there benefiting from everything that the pioneers have put down for the rest of us. And so I think it's important to respect those people. I think it's important to listen to what they have to say and to learn from their experience. It does mean, I do also think that we should try to do better. I don't think that means that we are better. I think it just means that we should try to do better. Everybody should. It doesn't matter who you are. Always try to improve. The other thing I want to try to accomplish with this introductory episode is help with my perspective, just help share what my perspective is on breeding, and help with some terminology so that you can really benefit from the rest of the conversations that come after this. So when we talk about selective breeding, I think immediately people start to think, like, how is that different from line breeding? And I think that the difference between selective breeding and line breeding is selective breeding is you're selecting for traits, and you know that those traits could be in two different animals, and ideally they're unrelated, completely unrelated. And then you select those animals to breed them to try to get more of those traits. When you use the term line breeding, you're saying that not only are you selecting for those traits, but you recognize that they are related. You recognize that the two animals, they're related in some way. And so you're breeding animals that are not unrelated to get more of those traits. And that's at least how I think about it. I personally say that I prefer to selectively breed for specific phenotypes. And a phenotype is a collection of traits that are found in Panther Chameleon locales. So every time I give an explanation, it seems like there's another term that needs an explanation, but bear with me. Panther chameleons, one of the really cool things about this species is that many populations have been isolated from each other and formed locales. We call them locales, but it's basically an isolated population with some shared characteristics such that you can identify it and differentiate between that population and all the other populations of panther chameleons on Madagascar. So we use the word locale, local form, to refer to those groupings of isolated panther chameleons. Phenotypes are kind of the extremes of what you can find in a given population of panther chameleons. So, for example, ambilobe, that local form has bodies that range from yellow to red, so yellow, orange, green, red, and bars that range from red to blue. So you can get very blue to very red, and most animals are somewhere in the middle. There are some white highlights, often around the face, gular region, sometimes along the spine. However, it is very rare to find a ambilobe with a white on the body, like between the bars. You're going to see a lateral stripe, but you won't see too much white on their bodies. So with that range of possibility, there's some extreme outcomes that you can get. And one of those extremes that's my favorite is when their body is almost entirely yellow and their bars are almost entirely blue. We call that yellow body, blue bar ambilobe. And that is a phenotype within the local form of ambilobe. The other extreme that I think is really cool inside of that local form is the red body blue bar, where their bodies are almost entirely red, almost no other color on them, and their bars are almost entirely blue. However, in some of the future episodes, we get into their genetics, but I'll just say right now, most animals do not fit into those phenotypes, those extreme phenotypes, the yellow body blue bar, red body blue bar, yellow body red bar. Most animals have every color in their body and every color in their bars. In fact, almost every animal does. I don't think I've ever seen one that doesn't. So none of them fit the phenotypes exactly. And that's where the kind of, subjectivity or art comes into play. Is breeders have their own personal standards for what they are trying to achieve and what they consider worth breeding. And when we say selective breeding, usually what it means is we are trying to achieve one of those extreme phenotype outcomes within a given local form. You can also selectively breed for an interesting cross-locale outcome, or selectively breed for a combination of traits rather than one of those extremes. So really just when we say selectively breed Panther Chameleons in this mini-series, what we're saying is that you as a breeder are selecting animals with a goal in mind, and you're trying to achieve that goal. That is distinct from line breeding in that you are not trying to reproduce a founding animal by combining tons of their offspring with each other to try to reproduce the founder, or to mine out recessive traits or certain combinations of traits that are very similar to that founding animal. That's line breeding. It's kind of semantic because every animal in captivity, there's not enough founders to really be completely unrelated. But I would say that one of the big differences between selective breeders and line breeders is that line breeders are going to breed animals that are as closely related as they can without getting punished. Whereas selective breeders are going to try to breed animals that are as unrelated as possible but share the traits that they want. So that's where they differ, and I think that's a pretty big difference, because when you selectively breed and you find animals that are completely unrelated, that's going to get you really excited as someone who has that goal of optimizing for genetic diversity. Whereas on the other side, they're kind of optimizing for not getting punished by the chameleon gods for pairing animals that are too closely related. So that's just the way that I think about it. I think that it's very subjective. I don't think that is a consensus opinion, but it's just kind of how I think about it. The other terminology that's going to come up throughout this series, things like mother, father. When we say sire, we mean father. When we say dom, we mean mother. Filial group is a way to talk about how far away the most recent wild-caught ancestor is. So, for example, F1 is the first generation from a wild-caught parent. F2 is the second generation from a wild-caught grandparent, and so forth. The F resets when you add wild-caught blood, because whenever you breed a wild-caught to another animal, the next generation is going to be F1. CG, current generation, does not reset. It is always going to count the oldest line of captive bred animals. And so even when you mix in a new wild-caught, your CG just keeps going up as long as the current generation is extended in captivity. The F number goes up, the CG number goes up. You respect the highest CG number and you follow the lowest F number. It's kind of what I think that the reason it's valuable for us in the hobby is because it's a way of paying respect to people who figured it out, and who, without their work, you couldn't be doing what you're doing. So when someone is like, wow, CG14, who is that? Ed Kammer is whose that is. That there's really, I don't think there's anybody else in the United States who's at CG 14 or 15. So that's an important thing to do. I think it's important to recognize that if you've got Ed Cameron's lines in your project, which is true of basically everybody in the United States, that you let people know. Like, let people know, hey, I have cameras on this side 2 gens back. I have cameras on this side 3 gens back. Like, whatever it is. Don't try to pretend like you created something new, because you didn't. The same goes for filial number, in that it helps you recognize the person who put in the effort and took the risk to acclimate the wildcaught. So when you say F2, people are going to want to know who that wildcaught is, where it came from, who did the acclimation work, and so forth. And so I think that both those numbers are useful in paying respect to people who deserve the credit, but also in tracking lineage, making sure you're not breeding animals that are closely related, and so forth. So those are numbers that come up, and pieces of information that I personally think are important to share. The other thing that will come up is actually an episode in this mini series is MadCam. We invited Alex Lobb and Torsten Negro to talk about their project, madcam.de, which has tons of information about Madagascar, lots of field data. They put probes in the soil to measure soil temperatures. They've taken pictures, weighed animals. They've got, in my opinion, the best source of information about the Panther Chameleon local forms on the internet. I really encourage you to check out that episode, because they are 2 of the most impressive people in the hobby, period. I really enjoyed my conversation with them. The other thing that will come up, and it's kind of something that we wouldn't be able to do without their work, is breeders are often selectively breeding for what's called a wild type look. And it's when someone says they're breeding nosy bay, that means that they're breeding an animal that looks like that local form. It also means potentially that they can track the lineage to animals that were imported from that local form. I think that between the two, tracking lineage and actually looking like the wild type, are 2 totally different things. On the one hand, as long as you trust the people who came before you, you can call anything, because it's what the person before you said. However, I think it's important to remember that we have examples of the wild local form through MadCam. And what I think we should do from a selective breeding standpoint is breed for the wild type. Breed animals that look like that local form and try to preserve the way it looks. So our goal as breeders is not to breed a red bar, white-bodied ambilobe because we think it's cool that somehow that happened. It's probably from Cap Est. It's just not cool. Like, why is that cool? It doesn't look anything like the wild form. And when you sell that as ambilobe, I think is how you say it. I'm trying to say it right. That is just not very helpful because it's controversial. It's probably wrong. It's probably wrong because the only animals that I'm aware of that really don't resemble their wild form, their wild type, are animals with incomplete lineage, or animals which didn't look like their wild type from the very beginning, meaning that they were probably mislabeled. So we're talking about animals that are popping off looking crazy at the F1 generation or F2 generation. There's no selective breeding there. There's no, like, you didn't find something new. You didn't create it through multiple generations. You just bred an animal that was mislabeled. That's all. And then the only other type of situation where you see animals that don't look like their wild type are when they have incomplete lineage, where there's a gap. And it doesn't take too much imagination. If you saw an animal pop out with a white body and red bars with a gap in its lineage, where they're saying that it's ambilobe, that gap was probably a gap best. And so I think that when people say that they selectively breed to create something totally new, that we should be incredibly skeptical of that. Because most of the people who are breeding these animals and trying to achieve the wild type are not getting those things popping off. And so that would happen in both places. It wouldn't just be happening in the places where people are having fun doing cross pairings every once in a while, and then they have their pure projects, air quotes. That's where that often shows up. And so I think that that's another part of selective breeding, is breeding for the wild type. It means you have a healthy skepticism for the stories that people tell about animals that don't look like the wild type. And you select the ones that do. So even if they can say the lineage and try to argue that it is a local form that it doesn't appear to be, I personally just don't trust it. I just avoid it. Why mess with that, is my opinion. And on the other side of that, you have people who are selectively breeding for like designer cross locales, where they're looking at two different local forms and they're combining them to produce, or to attempt to produce, a different color. And that's a situation where you really can create something new, and that type of selective breeding is something that I have zero experience with, and I did not find anybody to interview and discuss that with. I think partly because I don't have much interest in it, but maybe at some point in the future I'll go get somebody who's got more experience doing purposeful designer cross combinations and see what they've learned. Because I am curious to some degree, but it is not something that I've spent much time thinking about. I've just avoided it. And we talked about phenotype earlier, which is a collection of traits found within a Panther Chameleon locale. Often people ask what's the difference between that and a morph, because they'll come from maybe other hobbies where people use the term morph. And in Panther Chameleons, we don't have any known morphs per se. We don't have any known traits that come from a dominant, codominant recessive trait. Most of what we see in Panther Chameleons is either polygenic traits or oligogenic traits. That means is it's complex. It means that there's the genotype that encodes for a given phenotype is multiple genes. We don't know how many. It could be 5, it could be 1,000. And then the combinations of all of those genes produces the thing that you see. It's not a one-to-one, like if the gene is present, you're going to see a albino or a xanthic or you name it. We don't have genes like that in Panther Chameleons. Those are the types of genes that we often use the term morph for, and in Panther Chameleons we generally use phenotype to talk about all the traits and kind of a shorthand for that complexity. This is a topic that is poorly understood. It's a fundamental concept in being able to selectively breed this species. That's why we start out with this conversation with Chris Anderson talking about the genetics and phenotypes and local forms. And I think that I was super excited about that episode because I've heard Chris talk about a bunch of different things, but not Panther Chameleons. So if that interests you, that's another thing that's coming in this mini-series. I really encourage you to check that one out. The next couple things are information that I share on my website and in my project that are not currently normal in the hobby, and that I wish were normal. And after finishing this series, you'll understand why I think this information is important and why I think we should start sharing it. So, number one is sibling pictures. Not just one sibling, but all of them. Because in this complex phenotype and complex polygenic traits that we're trying to get, that could be as a customer trying to buy a yellow chameleon, that could be as a breeder trying to produce a yellow chameleon. If you don't see siblings from the female that you plan to breed, then you don't understand the distribution of possibilities. And you can't see the traits on her because Panther Chameleons are sexually dimorphic. The males carry the traits that we're often breeding for, the bright colors and size and identifiable locale and phenotype. Females hide it. They don't present their phenotype and they do not present their locale. You can't see anything on them from a genetic standpoint. You just have to guess. And in order to guess accurately, you need information. You need sibling pictures. You need lineage information. And so the more siblings you can see, the better. But if you only see one sibling, there's probably a reason. Like I'm always extremely skeptical when somebody can only show me one sibling, because it means what? The other siblings didn't survive. They're too ugly to show. And run down the list of why you didn't see any more than one. And so if you're going to breed that female with that little information, it's almost random, like you're not quite sure what you're going to get. And so the more siblings you see, the less random it is. The more certainty you get in what you're actually working with from that female, but also what you're going to buy as a customer. So that's the first piece of information I think that we should really start to collect and share in a more systematic way. The second is ancestry reports, because before we have siblings, say, it's the first clutch, all the babies are really young, and we can't really see anything from sibling information, the next best thing is ancestry. So the father, the mother's father, the mother's mother's father, the mother's 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 father, and so on. And the reason I just skipped right over to the mom's side and started running up the matrilineal lineage instead of the sire's lineage is because you can just look at the sire to see what traits he carries. If he's yellow, there's a good chance he's going to produce yellow. If he's red, there's a good chance he's going to produce red. If he's got blue bars, good. There's a good chance he can throw blue bars. If his father had red bars and he has blue bars, it doesn't matter. He's probably going to produce blue bars. It's just like when you look at say in the ball python hobby, you have a pastel snake, has the pastel trait, and you look at the baby and you see that the baby does not have the pastel trait. When you breed the baby, it's not going to produce pastel babies. It doesn't have pastel. For whatever reason, in the Panther Chameleon hobby, people don't understand that very simple concept, which is that on the male side of the lineage, you can just look at them to see what traits they have, to determine what they could potentially produce. You don't need to go up their lineage to try to figure out what's over there, because it doesn't really matter as long as you can see what that sire has. It really doesn't matter what the next gen up had, unless you're not very good at looking at the details. And so that's a huge point, because a lot of people, when they look at a Panther Chameleon, they almost look at them from like a 10-foot distance, like 10 feet away. That chameleon looks yellow. It looks like it has blue bars. I think I'll call it a yellow body blue bar. I'm saying get out a magnifying glass and get up close and get in there, because if you see red between the scales, you can produce a red chameleon. Even though from a distance he looks yellow, look closely, because their genotype is complex. Their phenotype is very complex too. And if you don't look at the details, you're not going to see what traits that animal is carrying. So you would be surprised when it produces a red-bodied animal if you look at it from 10 feet and you say, oh, it's yellow. But when you look closely, you'll see that there's red in that animal. It is not a fluke. It comes from somewhere, and if you look closely, you'll understand where it comes from. So I really encourage people to look at animals in more detail, to start to recognize those traits. A little bit of red in one generation can become a lot of red in the next. A little bit of yellow in one generation can become a lot of yellow in the next. And that's why I personally like to try to select animals that are as far to the extreme as possible. So as much yellow and as little red as possible, because then you're going to get mostly yellow from that. Same for red. You want to get as red as possible with as little yellow as you can get, because that animal is going to produce more reds. From a breeding standpoint, those are very valuable, especially because customers often come with the expectation that they're going to get an animal that looks like the sire. So if your sire is somewhere in the middle, that expectation is going to be very difficult to meet. You're probably not going to meet it. So ancestry reports are less important on the sire side. They are extremely important on the dom side, because with a female, you cannot look at her to determine what traits she carries. You have to understand her lineage, and you have to do some basic math. When you see her sire, that's 50% of the information that you need. Now, when you see her mom's sire, that's only 25% of what's left. So when you look at her sire and her mom's sire, those two combined are 75% of the information. That means if you flipped a coin twice, the probability that you hit tails twice in a row is the probability that you hit on that 25% that you don't know. And if you've ever flipped a coin, you'll get a sense for how often you get two tails in a row. And that's why I always say that on those ancestry reports, sire and domsire is not enough information. And most people are doing that just for the offspring, right? The sire and the domsire of the offspring. I'm talking about on the female side, trying to get certainty on the female you're breeding. Her sire and her mom's sire is also not enough. You got to keep going. You got to keep going up that matrilineal lineage until you get comfortable with the level of certainty that she has the traits you want. So if two tails is not going to leave you comfortable, go one generation up, that's three tails in a row. Go another up, that's four tails in a row. So each time you add a sire to the mix, you're cutting the information that's remaining in half and adding that to the information that you know about that female. You'll never get down to zero, like 100%. You'll never get to 100%. But you need to figure out as a breeder or as a customer what you're comfortable with. I personally like to see at least 3, because that gets you to 87.5% of the information that's available. Or the chances that you're wrong are hitting 3 tails in a row, flipping a coin 3 times. You know, you're going to be wrong a decent number of times there, but at least it's, you know, only 1 out of 8 times instead of 1 out of 4. So if you want it to be 1 out of 16, you got to go and get a 4th sire on that female side and add him to the mix. So that's like 5 generations back on that female side. Then you start to feel comfortable. The problem is, you're going to rarely find an animal that has been selectively bred for 5 generations with all the same traits that you want to breed. So good luck with that. But as far as the probabilities go, I hope people understand that the information that you're gaining from those ancestry reports, 50% is from the sire, and then you can keep cutting the unknown in half by searching for sires on the female side, but you can never get to 100%. So I think those 2 pieces of information, siblings and ancestry reports, are things that are lacking in the hobby in general, and that we can do we can improve on that. And that's for selective breeding purposes, but it's also for customers, because customers are coming in trying to buy an animal, and they are more often than not disappointed by the outcome. I know I was disappointed with my first one. I had an unreasonable level of certainty about how the animal was going to look, and he did not look like I expected. So I was disappointed. And I think that most people come to the species with exactly that experience for their first animal. These pieces of information would help with that expectation, help people see that they're probably not going to get the sire. It's very rare. The other thing that I try to do, and I think that we should do more of, is to provide well-balanced lineage collages. And what I mean by that is, you don't make the prettiest chameleon the biggest picture on your collage, because that's often what people do. They'll go and get a picture of all the ancestors, and then they go grab the one that they think is the most beautiful, even though it's distant relative, and blow it up, make it really big. And then they scatter the rest around that beautiful chameleon. It's dishonest to structure the collage, the collage of pictures in a way that doesn't accurately represent the amount of information that it provides to the customer and to another breeder. I personally take the sire and make the sire the most prominent picture because that's 50% of the information, and then I shrink down the animals that are on the female side of the lineage because that's not as important and less likely from a buyer's perspective. They're less likely to get the dom sire than they are to get the sire. So I think that it's important to make sure that those collages are sized in a way that's accurate, that is not going to deceive your customers. The other thing that I find very useful is a dendrogram or a pedigree chart of their ancestry. What that does is it's a picture where you have the animal with one line going to the father, the sire, one line going to the dom, and then at the next level, one line going to the sire's sire, one line going to the sire's dom, and then the same for the mom. And that chart grows out in that way, with lines and pictures and any details that you can provide. But it's also important to, if you're going to go to, say you're going to go to the third generation, and then you don't know any of the information, then put blank spaces to represent the fact that you don't know the lineage, so that people can see where the gaps are. They can also see how much information you do know. I think that that's a really helpful way to lay out their ancestry because it highlights gaps in what we know. It also makes it easy to see how closely related any of their ancestors are if you're trying to do some pairings, and it's a very useful way to visualize this lineage information. So ancestry reports, well-balanced lineage collages, and dendrograms or pedigree charts. And the reason that all this information is really important is because most of the risk is for someone who is trying to purchase an animal of a given phenotype or locale is the fact that the buyer is at a disadvantage to the seller. The seller knows more information. They should share that information, in my opinion. That's because then, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but I think the main reason is because it's just the right thing to do. You don't obscure information from people at the point of sale. I believe that we should do our best to share every piece of information that we know so that our customers can make educated decisions about their purchase, and just so that we all can do a better job with this species. I think it's one of the more complex species in the hobby, and I really hope that we can continue to improve over the years to come, and that we can share information, learn from each other, and grow the hobby. So in that vein, this mini series I hope will be a valuable resource to you as a customer, as a breeder. And the next episode, I hope you join me to listen to Chris Anderson, Professor Chris Anderson. He's going to help us with some of the science and genetics and what that means for us as hobbyists and breeders of this amazing species. So thank you for joining me, and I look forward to hearing from you in the coming weeks. Thank you.